Hey everyone, and welcome to the My Friends Don't Read book club. I'm Mel and we are going to be going over our first ever book review today. This channel is for anyone that loves reading, and especially for anyone that doesn't have a group of friends that loves reading and discussing books together. It's about creating a community of book lovers online and encouraging other people so that we can discuss things about the books that we love. So the book review is going to be my new standard format. To start off, we will start with the book itself, when it was released, and then a completely spoiler-free book summary. I will then give my overall rating for the book, as well as whether I would recommend this book to a new beginner reader or not. And then we'll get into spoiler territory, which is what I absolutely love to listen to after I've read a book, to see if my opinions or conclusions that I drew from the book kind of align with everyone else's. It is always going to be the case that some people may have differing opinions, and that is absolutely fine. We're here to discuss that. So without further ado, let's get into our first book, Solace House by Will McLean. This is a book that I found in the bookstore down the road, and the book assistant at Book Hero told me that it's a new release and it's supposed to be quite good. So I picked it up and I started reading. I read it in physical form, but I don't have the copy here because I pretty much immediately gave it to someone else to read. So let's get into our book summary. So overall genre, I would describe it as a psychological thriller. The book is set in the summer of 1993 and it follows a group of uni students that just finished their first year. The main character is a broke university student named Alex Lane, and he remains at the halls of residence that he was staying after everyone else goes because he hasn't figured out his plans for the summer yet. He ends up kind of falling into this job where a group of the students that had nothing to do for the summer are clearing out a property that their university is going to be buying. So when he gets to the job, he finds the team that he's working with, and they're originally clearing out a building named the Marshlands, which is on the same site as Solace House, with quite a rich history. He works with a group of students his own age. We've got Clive, Ruth, Helen, Leo, and then a boy that was also left behind at his halls of residence that he has been watching from afar, who he finds very strange. About a week in, we are also introduced to Ella, another student who joins the others late and is going to be on this clean-up mission as well. My cat is joining us. This is Tortellini. Okay, so once they finish cleaning out Marshlands, they then move on to Solace House. Solace House is described as an old-timey Gothic mansion. It used to belong to a hoarder named Edwin Flane, who has recently passed away from old age, and is absolutely chock-a-block, filled to the brim with stuff that mainly just seems like junk that the students are going to have to go through and sort out for their university. The story pretty much from there follows the group as they're going through Flane's house, and they find his poetry that alludes to the fact that somewhere along the line he has lost his mind. He speaks of realms that he's able to access through rituals, and also speaks a lot of his lost mother and the mystery surrounding her disappearance. I think the back of the book said something along the lines of Alex and Ella dive deeper into the history of Flane's journals and poetry, while one of the students proves they are willing to sacrifice anything to reach the realm. Okay, so that is the summary. That is completely spoiler-free. Do I recommend this book? Yes. 1 billion times yes. I would genuinely say this is the best book that I have ever read to this date. Out of 10, I'm giving it a 9.5 star rating. In terms of readability and whether I would suggest this to a first-time reader as their first book, I would probably say no. The reason for that is it is just so thick with literary details. You have Flane's poetry, which is poetry of a madman. So it is very confusing and hard to read even for an avid reader. But even in the story itself, it is really, really highly descriptive. So it takes quite a long time, quite a few pages to kind of describe a certain scene and what's going on. And for someone that is reading for the first time, I think that might be quite hard to follow. For anyone used to reading, I don't think that should put you off in any way, because I was still turning those pages. I was still gripped. I was in the book. I wanted to know what was going on. But just for someone that is new to it, I think you might lose that attention span because it is a very long book. I think it's 500 pages, and I think by the time you actually get to where you know what's happening and that suspense is building, you might have already had to work so hard for that story that it's possible you may lose interest. Okay, spoiler territory. If you have not read the book, please go read the book now and come back to this. I promise you the read is worth it, and there is so much to discuss. Characters. Main character Alex Lane. I found his character to not be very well fleshed out. However, I think that was deliberate. So when we first start the book, there are a few chapters where he kind of shows that he will lie to impress people or go along with other people's opinions, and he's not really that strong-willed himself. When I finished reading this book and I read some other reviews, I heard people complaining about that, like Will McLean had almost forgotten about or missed certain details on his character that would make us more attached to him. Personally, I just think it was deliberate. I think when you get to the end of the book and you come to the point where you think either he is insane or that realm is real, I think it was deliberate that we haven't built him up as a character that we trust or don't trust. I think he shows across the whole book that he is someone that goes along with things. He doesn't really know who he is yet, and he kind of doesn't drive the story himself. He's more of an observer. Personally, I didn't mind that. I thought it was a good way to kind of misdirect us from fully knowing what was going on. You don't want to guess the plot twist well before it comes. So I didn't really mind him being a character that you had to put your own personality to. I think that was what he was meant to be, and to be fair, he is a university student. I feel like I was a bit like that. I feel like it is not unrealistic that someone at that age kind of just goes with the flow and doesn't have those strong opinions on things yet. The other characters, the other most common complaint that I've seen about this book is that they're not fully fleshed out either, and they're a little bit charactery. So I would agree with that in a sense. I do think they were a bit charactery. Helen was your average overly devout Christian that kind of couldn't understand anyone else's world. Ruth was a pretty classic goth. We had Leo with his dreadlocks, who was quite hippie-ish for that time, like quite a new age character. Clive, pretty classic stoner, didn't show much more than arrogance and a want to get stoned. Ella I saw as a kind of confusing mix between a hippie free spirit and also a fiery woman. I did find it kind of hard to juggle those two things because in my mind I can't think of someone that is both of those extremes. And Adam, the weird pale boy, who was quite obviously kept mysterious for a reason because he ends up being the main protagonist of the story at the end. For me, I don't think it took away from the story at all. I think the story was long enough and there was enough confusing things going on that I think if we were to have really fleshed out each character, it would have taken away from the plot a little bit. I was perfectly fine with the depth that they were given. I was shocked after I read this book that it was only 4 stars at the time of me filming this. It's only 4 stars out of 5. And to be fair, this only came out in May 2026, so I'm reading it pretty much a month after its release date. So I don't know if these reviews are going to change. I genuinely thought this was one of the best books I've ever read, if not the best book I've ever read. I do think, as I said earlier, there was a lot of literary devices that, as someone who hasn't been reading for 20 years, were a bit challenging to get through. In saying that, I was flipping the pages. I loved the book. I could not wait to see where we got. My heart was racing. I was scared. I had a nightmare in between the couple of days where I was reading this book about the book, and it was scary. But I just absolutely fell in love with this story. It's not really a story like I would want to put myself in and that I left feeling completely happy about. I kind of loved how the writing tripped the reader out. So the whole book is trippy, and there's a lot of use of mushrooms, drugs and that type of stuff, and then with the whole realm bending, obviously that's going to be a little bit mind bending, but I honestly feel when I was reading that book I was like, man, you have to be quite sane to read this. Because I kind of felt my perception of reality and death and the lines of the realms, I almost felt like it was getting into my head, the state that they were in when they were in that house. And I loved that. I don't know if my ring tracking my heart rate loved that, but from a reading experience point of view, I think that was absolutely unmatched. So I have heard in the reviews that it is actually quite similar to another book. It's like a merge of two different books. I will look it up and come back to telling you those in the end. And some people were saying that those previous books were superior to this one. I haven't read those other books, so for me, this book was absolutely amazing. This is the reason why I'm doing my first ever review on this one. One, because it was so recent that when I actually looked it up, I didn't see that many reviews. But also two, because for the most part, I disagreed with most of the negative parts of the reviews that I ended up finding online after it. So the biggest thing to talk about is the book ending. I think a lot of people got confused around the coma part. I took the book ending in a way that it was completely wrapped up and tied up in both directions. So I think you could have taken it as from that coma, he woke up and he had gone mad. His life hadn't gone the way that he wanted it to go, and he didn't appreciate what he had at the time, so his mind had reversed back to that state where he was in Solace House. His mind after then was then continuing to enter this loop and the realm of madness that you could almost say he caught from the guilt that he had been through. The whole entire thing from that coma could have been madness. At the very end, you could still think that even him going back in time and him saying, oh, well, I threw that key at Helen and the realms bent and there was a time loop, all of that you could say was complete madness. The book is written in a way where I feel like it honestly is up to the reader to decide that. I am choosing to go with the other option. I feel like it led more towards making sense that he did wake up from that coma and the entire round thing with Be Wise was correct. And then Adam was the one that then sent him into this different reality where he there had to live with the fear that one, he hadn't appreciated, and two, he had ended up killing the person that he loved the most. I like believing that side of it more. To me, it just feels like more wrapped up, but I can definitely see how in that way of thinking, he then returns and he enters that loop where he comes out and he sees Leo and the gang around their fireplace and they mention the clothing that he's wearing, which I loved. I even went back and read that chapter to make sure that I hadn't missed anything in that. And he throws the key at Helen and then he goes into almost a time loop in that realm of trying to get out of it. And at the end there, Adam kind of did win because he ends up with Ella. And that also makes sense that Adam won because he had to have entered the realm if we're following this logic, because when Flane entered that realm, he saw Adam there already, which he had to have been there already because the realm is past space and time. So if he ever got there, then he would have been there. I like to believe this is what the author was alluding to more so than that Alex Lane was actually insane in the end, honestly, because it's so much funner. But I do think you can believe both ways. I don't think it's completely closed for interpretation, and I think that's supposed to be deliberate in how the reader sees the world. Did the reader want it to be a fantasy book in the end where these kinds of things are real, or did the reader want it to be a psychological thriller and nothing was actually out of the ordinary? I like to believe the realm thing was true, but I honestly think you could believe both ways. I don't think there was sufficient evidence to say one way or the other. I still think there was enough in both directions to kind of wrap it up. I don't think we were left on a cliffhanger because you didn't have to decide and there was nothing hanging in both directions. He was either crazy or he went to that realm, and both directions were wrapped up. So I like that. I don't actually really like books that leave me on a cliffhanger or like leave me wanting more. I feel like I give my time to this book. I gave my world to this book. I point here, but it's not there. So after giving a book that amount of time, I want a solid ending, and I do feel like this still was a solid ending, even though it could have been one or the other. The trick about the poems being an acrostic inside an acrostic inside an acrostic, I loved that. I think I got that maybe a chapter before they came to in the book, which I think is quite good, because when I'm reading something like this, I am searching for answers. I'm trying to come to the conclusion before the author leads us there. I think it's just human nature. So I am really hard to get fooled and twisted into the end of the story. When he actually laid it out, I loved the way that it was done. It wasn't too obvious, it wasn't all of a sudden, and there were still parts that the author didn't explicitly say for you. You did actually have to go write down and take those acrostic letters yourself to get to the final conclusion that it was Abel, Flane's father, that killed the mother. I'll be 100% honest, something that I completely missed was that Alex Lane and Adam's names were both acrostics for Abel from the start. I knew there was some, I almost feel silly that I didn't pick that up. I've picked that up from reviews afterwards. I knew there was something. When they went over their names and all their names having the same initials, it was kind of leading me down the path where I thought that he was somehow Adam, or that there was going to be a time loop or a different reality where him and Adam were the same person. Or Adam and Flane were the same person and Alex wasn't real. There were a lot of different stories in my head that I was making when I read that, and I didn't actually sit down and write out or pick that up on paper that it spelled out Abel. And to be honest, I think I completely forgot Abel's name, since it was only mentioned really briefly at the start, and then we were talking about Edwin Flane ever since. So that's something that I missed, but that's something that I still liked to find from the reviews afterwards. So I definitely don't think it needed to have been more obvious, and maybe it was actually really obvious to everyone else but me. I don't know. And when I was speaking about characters, I mentioned that some people think they were a bit characterish and that I didn't mind that. I still stick with that, but I will say I did not like Ella's character. There were a couple of things that I kind of did want more developed, not in the personality wise, but in things that she said. She had this weird obsession with kind of making something for her, for us, and she wouldn't share. I think it's implied that that's because of her upbringing and she doesn't have that trust for people. But the whole for us thing, I felt like that was going to kind of go somewhere else, that there was more to this us than we knew of, and that didn't go anywhere. So that was one critique that I have, where that kind of left me a little bit that could have been a knot that was tied up more towards the end. Another thing I think definitely could have had more depth to it was the last day and the Annihilator. I was expecting a larger story than that. I was expecting domestic violence, or he, as in Alex Lane, was the killer, or something more to that story. So the story in the end was his parents died in the car crash, and that the dad actually possibly deliberately caused it. He saw something in his eyes that said, he's in this debt and he's having a hard time, he was suicidal, and he is the one that caused it. So the dad, I guess, became the Annihilator in that moment, and then that was the last day. Something about that I did feel almost disappointed by, because I was expecting a more outlandish story. In saying that, the entire story itself was so outlandish, I don't really know if it needed more outlandish details, or if that would have taken away from the main plot of the madness and the poetry in Flane's house. So I'm not mad about it. It's more just something that kind of upset me when I was reading that part in the book. This book was the first that I've read in this genre, and it's definitely made me want to continue reading in this genre. I absolutely loved it, and those critiques that I have were so small. I think this is my first book review, so when we get into some more, I will show you that there are a lot of things that I kind of nitpick about books that I just couldn't in this book. I really enjoyed from start to finish. I think, there was a couple of plot points that could have been thickened out that were put there to misdirect us. In all honesty, the book was written so well that I almost wonder if there was something in those that just went over my head. Maybe these things were written that way deliberately and there was meaning to that I just don't understand. So now that we've all read the book, please feel free to leave your comments below as to your interpretations of it. Like I say, I've seen a few reviews on this on Reddit where a few people were just very confused after the coma. A few people thought it was left on a cliffhanger. I kind of disagree with that. And a few people had complaints about the characters and how they were developed. For me, I still think this was absolutely 9.5 out of 10. It's the best book I've ever read, but I can't give it that 10 yet just in case I find anything else. But I will definitely go back and read his book before this. I'll look up those two other books. Okay, the other two books this is similar to is The Secret History and The House of Leaves. So the majority of readers that have actually already reviewed this book have said that it is no House of Leaves. That makes me very excited to read House of Leaves, and I would suggest that to you too. It's definitely going on my list of things to read. But I almost feel grateful that I haven't read that when I was reading Solace House, because it didn't take away anything from the reading experience to me by comparing it to this other book in my mind. I just absolutely loved Will McLean's writing of this book. I thought it was a genuine masterpiece. I loved the poetry, even though it was a little bit over my head. I'm not an in-depth poetry reader. But I love the twist with the poetry, and then also being exposed to that side of literature that I don't really read. So I'm going to be going back and reading The Apparition Phase, which was the book that he wrote previously, and also just looking more into the author. There are like questions that I have from reading this book. It just makes me quite nosy to be like, you know, he's writing about drugs a lot. Has he done drugs? Is he tripping out? Does he have these type of ideas, or is he just writing that? How did he write that so well? How did he write madness so compellingly that almost I felt you could slip into the madness yourself from reading the book? It was just really an experience, and an experience that I don't think I've ever had in any other book. And so with that, the end of my first book review. If you enjoyed this review, please feel free, even if you completely disagree with anything that I've said, to leave a comment below. I love talking about the way books end, and this book club is for people that don't have friends reading the same type of things and they don't get to talk about it with them. And I'll see you in the next one.